Welcome to episode 42 of my friend the Rainbow Circle. Since it's episode 42, of course I have to talk about um, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But the technique that I think is most interesting and fascinating from one of my favorite series of all time is Bathos, Bathos. And Bathos is something you see commonly in poetry. You don't hear it really identified that commonly in fiction, except for relatively recently. Um, I heard about an article going around about how um, the MCU is bad at emotion because it uses too much bathos. And I heard that and I said, oh, bathos, but wait a second. I totally disagree with you, but it's wonderful to hear somebody applying bathos to fiction because I love bathos. But bathos means the juxtaposition of starkly different tones, and usually, just traditionally with poetry, it could be used to talk about treating something really significant and holy or elevated in some way or royal, treating it with a very common sort of a tone. Shakespeare would do this all the time, um, but going from something very serious to something very silly and lighthearted, um, going from something very sacred to something kind of mundane or something not so sacred. Um, but the criticism of the MCU, that article, was about how the MCU would undermine its own emotional impact of any sort of scene by then undercutting it with a joke. And I really read that as a highly personal thing. I think it actually works better. Not always. There are plenty of scenes where it does undermine its ability to, effectively communicate emotional information um, by undermining, some sort of emotional scene with a joke. Um, but it's a really effective technique, arguably, for tempering emotional scenes. So if I imagine the MCU without any jokes, but with the sort of emotional scenes that it has. Really, my favorite MCU movie is Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Makes me bawl every time, I'm not afraid to admit. Um, but all of those Yondu scenes, pretty much every interaction between um, Yondu and Peter Quill is undercut by a joke. But if you played a lot of those straight, a lot of them will come off as melodramatic or kind of cheesy. I like cheesy stuff. A lot of Guardians of the Galaxy is very very cheesy. Doesn't bother me a bit. Um, but I think something that undermines emotional impact even more is overt melodramatic cheesiness. I talked about this in my Robin Williams episode 1, so long ago, 41 episodes ago. Talked about this, and that's a lot of what undermines a lot of Robin Williams parts. Even though I deeply, passionately love Robin Williams in everything, I would say I personally love him in everything. That's something that undermines a lot of his performances is when he is really melodramatic. That can actually undercut the emotion. It's short circuits the emotional impact of what he's doing because he's so overtly emotional about it. Um, and so that's how the MCU uses bathos. It juxtaposes this deeply serious, what I would say, serious moment with a joke, um, like Peter Quill saying, talking about describing Yandu in these ridiculous ways, um, and then you follow that with all of the Reavers giving him this light show, you know, and the Cat Stevens playing and all that sort of stuff. The joking then tempers that deeply emotional scene and makes it work better, arguably. For this particular commentator, it made it uh, work less well, but I would argue it makes it work better. And that's a highly personal thing, but that's the technique that they're using. They're using bathos. Douglas Adams uses a much more extreme version of bathos, as extreme as it gets, And I don't know that his aim is necessarily that same sort of emotion. Like with Peter Quill and Yondu, it's heartbreak and deep sort of character stuff. For Hitchhiker's Guide, I mean, there are a lot of emotional moments. It's more overtly a comedy, so there's a lot more overtly comedic moments. Uh, uh, but you get emotional moments that sort of come out of nowhere and surprise you with Arthur Dent, and I think it's much more successfully emotional um, than the movie version. And there are a lot of things I love about the movie version with Martin Freeman and Sam Rockwell and Zoe Deschanel and all of them. There are lots and lots of good things, and that's the tricky thing about that movie adaptation. There's so many little moments. Alan Rickman as Marvin. There's so many little moments that are just great and just perfect. Just unfortunately, the aggregate of the movie fails in a lot of ways, and one of the ways it fails is by being really sentimental. And that's sort of the American influence, I guess. There's really very, very, very little sentimental about the original book. But some of the best moments of the book are moments of really extreme bathos. And I've been talking about uh, opening lines. And the first Guardians of the the first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, easy to mix up those titles. The first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has one of the great, what really famous opening line, but one of the great opening lines. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. So the sun, which is right there shining through the window, the sun hangs on the cross of the zodiac with 12 signs to be exact. Sorry, I'm quoting KRS-One randomly. The sun is one of the most important things to us, and it's he's treating it as this mundane thing. And so many of the great moments are like that. And really the famous moments. Maggie. My dog is knocking over everything and turning everything chaotic. Stop. Go away. I love you, but go away. I'm able to express my emotion for you without undercutting it in any way. However, just go away. Because you're knocking over everything. But where was that? So many of the great moments are just that's the technique that he's using, and he's using it to an extreme. And part of that is the Monty Python influence. There's so much crossover with Monty Python. And Douglas Adams is sort of the link between Monty Python and Doctor Who. And Doctor Who has so many great emotional moments. Very, it can be cheesy and schmaltzy. I love Doctor Who, but it can be cheesy and schmaltzy and sentimental. Why do you have to make so much noise? Get out of here, you beast, you crazy beast. Doctor Who monsters invading my room. But it can have so many really sentimental moments. I was just talking with someone about the Van Gogh episode, how that's just a heartbreaking tearjerker. And arguably that's a lot of Bathos, because that episode also has a chicken monster in it. But it's this heartbreaking ending. So great technique that Doctor Who uses a lot. Monty Python uses it not really for any emotional ends. It's hilarious and subversive and anarchic and all that sort of stuff. Rarely ever is it really deeply emotional. My dogs are trying to invade the room. Now that I've shut them out, they're trying to invade. You're being too noisy. And you're still being too noisy. And so Hitchhiker's Guide is sort of Douglas Adams is sort of the middle ground between that, where it is anarchic and subversive and hilarious and all that sort of stuff. And it's able to achieve emotional impact, and it doesn't do that through sentimentality. It doesn't do that through schmaltziness or cheesiness, like Doctor Who can do, and I love it, but Doctor Who could definitely do that. Douglas Adams is really that middle ground, where the emotional impact that it achieves is sort of under a layer, under these deep layers of bathos. And bathos is really the technique that all of them are using. It's arguably a very British technique to use, a very British sort of literary technique to use, going back at least to Shakespeare for sure. Um, and so any of the famous moments, and I struggle with the order of Hitchhiker's Guide because I listened to the audiobook and I listened to the radio show and I watched the TV show. Um, and so I got them all mixed up. So I couldn't tell you. I had somebody summarizing it and I said, you know, you have it in the totally wrong order. The restaurant at the end of the universe is before, whatever else. I can't remember. And he said, "Oh no, that's no the book. It's definitely the restaurant in the universe is after. I forget what it was. So I have the order all mixed up, so I can never really tell you what the order of it is. But it doesn't matter really. It's very episodic and full of vignettes. It's basically a sketch comedy story. It's like more like a sitcom. It's like a sitcom with where Arthur Dent gets into different scrapes and tries to get out of them, and it just ends up being screwed somehow. But um, the Bathos is really designed for the most part to demonstrate to Arthur that he's has no value, that he's entirely unimportant. He might have moments where he feels important, but then he gets reminded that he's entirely unimportant and everything is pointless. Um, Probably the most successfully emotional Monty Python movie is probably Life of Brian. Um, and that sort of Brian's trajectory is kind of similar to Arthur Dent's trajectory of being, feeling like he might be important and then being reminded he's not important. And that first line is perfect for that. But there's a whole series just of moments like that where the expected outcome is opposite of the irony that the Bathos is able to achieve. Um, Creates the humor, certainly. Um, but there's an emotional impact partly through the ability of the Bathos, the extreme Bathos, to create this mood of hopelessness, but laughing at the hopelessness. And that's sort of the emotional impact where um, you're not you're not laughing at other characters all the time. That's a lot of that, but you're not laughing at Arthur Dent necessarily, and from a distance from Arthur Dent, you're sort of with him and his hopelessness, and his resignation to hopelessness, and then some hope, and then resignation to hopelessness. And so all of the really famous moments are really great examples of that extreme bathos of the 42, for example. This is why 42. Uh, the they want to find out the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, and it turns out to be just 42, and they need to figure out the question. Um, and he never answers the question. He never gives the question to that answer. And he intended it to be arbitrary. Um, and so there's plenty you can read out of that, but the emotional impact of it is the whole idea, and you can relate it to the Rainbow Circle, where searching for the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, an endpoint focus, an endpoint goal of having, um, the success of a quest. If you think of 42 as being the quest, and the question to figure out 42 as being the quest, ultimately the trajectory of the story, or ultimately the drive of the story, is not successful completion of the quest. It's the quest itself, not to get too cheesily sentimental, but that is genuinely where the value of the story is, in the visceral impact. Whether it's, deeply emotional, heartbreaking, tragic moments like, Yondu and Peter Quill, much more obviously, or it's creation of this mood of laughing at hopelessness with Arthur Dent. That's still the visceral impact. What is the visceral impact? It's hilarious. It's hopeless. It's all of these different things. Even if it's not heartbreak for Arthur Dent, it's not a love story. And yes, I love you, but you're in my face. Okay. It's not a love story like it is with the very Americanized version. So it's not the really overt sort of emotional impact. It's still definitely a mood that the Bathos creates. Um, and so, in my favorite scene, and I think um, uh, one of the scenes that the movie does best is the whale and the bowl of petunias. Two missiles uh, through the improbability drive or whatever. The two missiles are shot at their ship, um, and they turn them into a whale and a bowl of petunias. Um, and there's Bathos there. You the unexpected result is very different tonally from what you would expect as an adventure story. It sort of sets you up for this result of they're just going to blow up the missiles and save themselves heroically. Um, so turning into a whale and a bowl of petunias is the opposite result. And so you have really the what Douglas Adams does is he doesn't have this this adamant insistence on sticking with the storyline consistently all the way through in a single arc. He takes all of these side trips just constantly. This is why thinking of what the actual order of the story is impossible, partly because there are three different versions or four different versions. Um, and the whole thing is so episodic and just all over the place. Um, but he veers into the mind of the whale and the bowl of the petunias. What does the whale think as he's falling out of the sky? And it's a very emotional, and this is where the movie gets it right. It's a very emotional scene. He's coming to life for the first time and discovering everything, and it's he's bright and hopeful. There's that image of hope being dashed. And he says, "What should I call this thing coming towards me? I'll call it the ground," and then he gets smashed. And then the bowl of petunias, and this is where Bathos is folded into Bathos. Thanks for that. Thanks a lot. Just bundles of chaos. Um, can you be still? My series Far Colony is in totally absolutely influenced by Douglas Adams. I have a story called Foreign Planets that while I hope it's more overtly emotional and more hopeful, because I'm American and that sort of hopelessness is a very British thing. And still, the story sequence is very much influenced by Hitchhiker's Guide, overtly. But the Bowl of Petunia says, "Oh no, not again," which we don't really get deep insight into who the Bowl of Petunias is. In that first book, we don't get insight into, hey, I love you, but let me have a face unblocked by a cat for a few seconds, please. We don't get insight into who the Bowl of Petunias is. It's an emotionally impactful scene. But what gives it the emotional impact, arguably, and emotional impact is very personal. I feel a lot of emotional impact from this scene. But arguably, what gives it the emotional impact is the Bathos, the juxtaposition of this very, very sentimental and highly emotional sort of dashed hope of this whale falling out of the sky and recognizing the world for the first time. And that focus on the whale as it's falling, and then being crushed. And then juxtaposing that with an unexpected shift in tone of the bowl of petunias saying, "Oh no, not again." It creates a sense of mystery. It creates the sense of that contrast of tone is jarring. So it creates a very different sort of visceral impact instead of just the very Americanized, overt Martin Freeman and Zooey Deschanel. Will they? Won't they? They learn to fall in love with each other. That's so obvious and such a easy to identify emotion. Whereas the bowl of petunias saying, "Oh no, not again," it's hard to really categorize what that emotional sensation is. but in late in a later book he explains why the bowl of petunias. And when I found that out that he explained why the bowl of petunias says that, I was disappointed. Were you disappointed? I was disappointed that he would explain it, because I think that's just perfect in the lack of explanation. And that's the sort of thing that I think creative writing workshops are just very poorly designed to enhance. If he had presented the bowl of petunias to a creative writing workshop, they might have said, I wonder why the bowl of petunias. I would like to know why the bowl of petunias said, "Oh no, not again." Well, of course you want to know. That's the whole drive of that scene, is not knowing. But he explains it later. But he does it so perfectly that I can't complain. I don't want to know why the bowl of petunia says that, but I can't complain just because he does it so perfectly. Um, Even explaining something like that is such a Douglas Adams style bathos. You shouldn't explain it, but he does, but the way he does is just so perfect for his style. But anyway, bathos is a great technique. My other favorite one that I'm always ripping off, just I accidentally am ripping it off in various ways, is the babblefish. The babblefish is just perfect in so many ways because it takes care of what is arguably an unnecessary plot hole in all books dealing with aliens. How do you understand what the aliens are saying? That you kind of have to throw in there sometimes. Uh, like in Star Trek, the translators, the universal translators, why don't their mouths move in a different language? You can overthink that plot hole and it's just unnecessary. He does that with the babblefish, but he uses that as this extreme bathos to say the babblefish is so perfectly a creature created for the purpose of translating what everyone says, that it proves the existence of God and therefore disproving the existence of God. And so it's that extreme sort of bathos, that hope dashed, that sort of tone that comes up constantly. So I'm ripping off the babblefish all the time, and I think that's such a great idea. It's a story trope that whether I intend to rip it off or not, it's a story trope that has such potential for so many different stories. The creature that is just magically, perfectly designed by evolution for a particular purpose, and so many other aspects of that particular story that that's just one of my favorite ones to steal from. I'll admit that if Douglas Adams' estate ever sues me, I've never gotten anything so close to the babblefish. I think I've accidentally called something a babblefish. I use the term babble fox all the time, which I'm sure I'm gonna have to change just because it's a little bit too close to babblefish, and I realized that after the fact. That's what I was ripping off. Um, but if the Douglas Adams estate ever sues me, I'll feel honored. Um, the spirit of Douglas Adams has dashed my hope in the best possible ways. But anyway, I'll wrap it up for today. I didn't quite make it to 42 minutes. That would be overly convenient. But Bathos, great technique to use. I love it. One of my favorite techniques. Lots and lots and lots of fun. Don't listen to anybody who says it's a bad technique. It's wonderful. See you in the next episode.